And here we are again.
Hello. Welcome back. Same faces, different Zoom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello. Hey, Ron.
Hi, Phil.
I think we've only got one thing on the agenda so far, but feel free to add more. Give another maybe a couple minutes, see if anybody else joins us, and then we'll get going. All righty, we're 5 minutes in. Let's go ahead and get started. This first one is from Bird Rock. He's not here, but we can have the conversation probably anyhow. Should a K8s admin be able to interact with the Korifi API or not? Question mark. I think at this point you can't, right? Unless you get the unless you get a particular role associated with you. Do we feel that's the right behavior?
Yeah, it's the problem, I guess, is if you're not bound to a proper role, you can do some things, but then you can't do other things. So you get weird behaviors like I can create the org, but then I can't list it back.
Yeah, this is Birdrock's white whale that he's been working on this week. And yeah, I think the create org is the big one that he's frustrated with. There doesn't seem to be really a good way to stop that. But just in general, I think the question came up yesterday in Slack of, is this something that we actually want to try and stop?
We had a warning introduced exactly for this. It's like you're trying to use Korifi with a non-Korifi user, weird things might happen, and they usually do.
Yeah.
So we might. I think he had proposed a solution that was very specific around this create org use case. What I proposed instead was, why don't we, like, if we don't want these people to use the API, just block them. We already know how to detect them. It will be another step kind of reinforcing this concept of Korifi users, just like there are CF users on top of Kubernetes users, which I think maps nicely with traditional CF, because in CF there is UAA users, and then CF keeps like a very lightweight users table, which kind of mirrors the UAA one, but it still keeps track of its own users. And when you, for example, create a role binding in CF, it adds an entry to its own table. And CF has a /v3/users endpoint where it lists its own users, which are not the UAA users, these are the CF users. And you can delete stuff from that table, for example, and users will be added back if you rebound them, etc. So our equivalent is the bindings we have in the root namespace. So like when you create a role in Korifi automatically creates a binding in the root namespace, which is needed for listing orgs, I think, for domains as well, I think, for a few things. So my idea was we could just do a one-to-one mapping from conceptual CF users to these roles and implement the /v3/users endpoints based on those role bindings. And then people will be able to delete those, because another concern was they leak. Like you create bindings in Korifi, and we add all these bindings to the root namespace. Then you delete the bindings you've created, but the binding in the root namespace never goes away because there's no reliable way of deleting those. So we kind of keep accumulating them. But this is exactly what CF does with its users. If you don't want them anymore, you have to explicitly delete them. So it's a nice, I think, coincidence that like without really doing it on purpose, we end up behaving pretty much exactly like CF. We just need to introduce those endpoints. And like we could, once we decide, okay, that list of bindings in the root namespace is basically our users table, we can just say, if you're not there, you can't do anything. Which means that, yeah, once someone binds you to any role, you end up added there, and then you can use the thing, which means the first user needs to be added there by the setup, and that's the admin. And we already do that. So we could just say, if you're not there, you're not a Korifi user, and we reject everything. I don't know how intuitive this could be for users though. Like the concept of having like Korifi users, which are a subset of the cluster users, and how acceptable that is.
And that we would only be blocking them from the API standpoint, right? Or would we?
Yeah, it's just we reject them. We reject the requests to the API.
Right. So they could theoretically still do kubectl and get around it in some other way.
Well,
certainly like orgs and spaces and role bindings.
Yeah.
I think
I don't know if at the moment they can just. Can they list all orgs at the moment, or they can?
I mean, if they're a cluster admin, they can list everything.
Yeah, so that's
they could list it using kubectl, get CF orgs in the CF namespace, in the root namespace. They just couldn't list them through the API.
Yeah,
we're doing extra filtering.
Yeah,
and I think that makes sense. Protecting the API and saying if you want to use the API, you've got to be you've got to have a Korifi role, because otherwise the Korifi roles don't work. That makes sense. If they want to hit the cluster, and they're a cluster admin,
go on.
Fine. We're going to document simple cases like declaratively creating orgs and spaces and role bindings, because that's part of the platform management side of things. I don't know that we're going to go into more detail of how to push an app effectively by creating your own CI, custom resources.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think many people are going to try and do that anyway. So I think that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, the PR is there. I think we already do that. We'd be ready to merge it right now if you want to. Because basically, you just have to repurpose that middleware, which currently just adds this warning header to the response, to instead just return a 400 or something. Or 403?
403 is forbidden.
403 or whatever is the more appropriate error, and just say, sorry, you're not allowed in. And maybe add something somewhere to either some troubleshooting doc or something to say, if you get this error, then make sure you add a user to Korifi and make sure that when you use the user you specified when you installed Korifi, and or a user that you've previously bound to some role in Korifi. I think it's fair.
Yeah, I think that sounds reasonable.
Did I summarize that right? Treat the CF namespace bindings as CF users table and reject API.
Yeah, at the moment, I'm not entirely sure how we are detecting whether a user is a Korifi user or not. I don't know if you're checking those bindings or if you're doing something else.
We are, I think the code lists all of the role bindings and then filters down based on the propagation, the Korifi propagation label. So it either has to have propagation true or propagation false on it for it to be considered a Korifi role binding. And then it matches the subject to the user. And if it finds an entry that matches all of that, then they're a CF user at that point.
Yeah, so we could consider changing the implementation to just look at those root bindings, because technically you get one every time you get bound to anything.
Yeah, you're either going to have a CF admin root role binding or a CF root user.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unless
something goes wrong, but then you have issues down the line. If that happens, then everyone should have a binding there. So we should just check that and treat that as our user base, basically, as our users table. So we could do that as part of this. We could just simplify that middleware, just look at the root binding instead of trying to be fancy. And then we can have stories about implementing the users endpoints. It's not like they're very. I think the only thing that they would add is, apart maybe being able to list. So I have an idea of all the users in your that are like recognized by Korifi, and then deleting. So again, like if you want someone to be out of the system, you even if you unbind them from everything, they still keep this binding, which has some permissions like listing orgs and stuff. So if you want them out of the system, then you can go in and delete them if we implement the endpoint correctly. So it could make sense to implement those endpoints at some point.
Okay, that's fair. Any other points on this? Sounds like there's not much, not much argument here, really.
No, I think I like this idea. I mean, we'll see what Birdrock says when he's back. But yeah, I think this sounds like a great idea.
Cool. Okay. Let's move on. Giuseppe.
Yeah, so we're planning to release 0.7 soon. So either this week or beginning next week tops. The GC work, so the cleanup work about deleting leftovers is done. The labels annotations work has been wrapped up. There is I think some logs work that has been done to improve logs. And I think the work about supporting service accounts as Korifi users is basically is already landed in main. And potentially we could get other stuff as well about declarative management, like of spaces and orgs, etc. So it's going to be a nice, rich of features release. And it's been a while since we released, so about time. And yeah, just expect something. As usual, I will make some loud announcement on the Slack channel when it's out.
Nice.
Right on. Ram, I know in the past you've been trying to do like blog posts and stuff like that, or we've been trying to get some things together. Is there something we want to do for this still, potentially, or for 0.7? I don't know.
Around PRs and things like that, you mean? Or
I don't know. I just know in the past you've encouraged us to do some kind of blog posts and things like that. I wasn't sure if that's something we want to try and coordinate with the release, or I don't know. I'm just asking the question.
yeah, I'd love that.
Okay.
I think we can start getting into something regular too, if that's possible. That being said, I imagine this will be like our big release before KubeCon. So there's going to be like a push at KubeCon that basically says we are at v0.7, and historically these are the things that we've tried and we've iterated on and changed, and this is where we are at right now, and this is where we intend to go. Yeah. So yeah, blog post would definitely be nice.
And like we had some back and forth about some other material for KubeCon. Like, how do you feel about that? Like I think there were a bunch of edits, but there was like a deadline last week, so I don't know what happened with that. If you just
that was
decided to wait, or
no, we've already submitted that. So I made edits
okay,
based on all the comments that I got. So thank you for that.
So that's done.
So that, yeah. So that is basically part of a larger series that we're writing. Let me check if no, so that hasn't been sent for publishing yet. But I was able to incorporate all of the inputs that you had. Yeah. So you had written like a shorter summary of, what it should be and what the goals are and things like that. So yeah, that's the version that we're going to go with. But it's not out for publishing yet. It'll probably go out at the end of next week. Yeah. Week of the 31st.
Nice.
Okay, cool. No, that's good. All right. This last thing is yours as well, Ron.
Yeah, so I had applied to speak at SpringOne about Korifi at the end of last year. And then SpringOne was converted into, I think, like a 2023 based virtual only event. But then they also have like a Golden Path to Production series. And the Korifi talk is scheduled for the 4th of April. So I'm going to be making use of the stuff that we have in terms of just demonstrate like a local install and then show that the same thing works on like a remote instance. And I'll be using that, the one that we use for acceptance tests. I'll reserve some time closer to the date and let everybody know. But yeah, that's basically what I had. But if folks think that there might be some good talking points, feel free to sound them on Slack or here or wherever. So I thought I'll just let people know beforehand that there is a talk. Yeah, any inputs are welcome. There's obviously more that I don't know about the software than what I do know. So, we welcome all sorts of inputs.
Yeah, you could also consider just using kind maybe for the demo, because if it's fully offline, you don't have to rely on dodgy Wi-Fi's and stuff. It's just all runs on your machine and you don't have to worry.
Bedrock and I had a very interesting experience with kind.
Yeah, that's the thing.
At CF Day, but yes.
Was that kind still?
Yep, that was kind on Bedrock.
And it was totally broken as well. I don't know.
No,
it's so weird.
It just couldn't download the images.
Because like the images are still downloaded.
That was the one thing we were doing, was using real images, and it wouldn't.
Oh yeah, right. It's not. So it's not a fully offline experience as I thought. It's actually.
Well, if you build your own images, then it is using the deploy on kind script.
Right.
That's the thing, right?
But
so
if
you're
deploying a release, you've got to do work to manually preload those images.
Right.
APAC
yeah. So if you want to demo,
anyway.
if you want to demo Helm itself, then no, I guess, because but otherwise, I think you're authorized to use deploy on kind.
And then yes, Kieran's point is the build packs were the big problem. That's the online stuff. Because they're pulling.
Because even if you use deploy on kind, when you push an app, it tries to download the build packs from the internet.
Well, deploying is fine, but when you push an app, the whole process, is online.
Yeah. When you push it, downloads Paquito from the internet. So I would say if you want to be Wi-Fi proof and want to try to come up with like a fully offline experience, and if you get stuck, maybe you can ask on the channel. We can help you to set up something that is fully offline. Because surely you can.
It's a virtual summit though.
It's as long as you trust.
If it's a virtual summit and you are at home, then maybe you don't need to do this. But it was completely convinced that it was offline, but no, it's not. You're right. You're still vulnerable to these problems.
Yeah. I mean, I did demo it last week. I did the deploy on kind, and then I did I pushed a Go app and the test JavaScript app. Everything worked okay. So
at home, always we do this all the time. It just works. The problem is you go to the conference center and they have
really bad Wi-Fi
that is either really bad or completely, bloated by a billion people trying to use it at the same time, or both, and you're stuck. Maybe we should for the future think about having a full offline demo, so that the next one of us who goes to a conference has that as a weapon, so that you can just do everything on your machine and you only have to plug the projector and that's it. But it's not as easy as I thought. You need to figure out a way to load the build packs on the local container registry or something. Somehow. That could be even useful for development. Let's say you want to work on Korifi without a connection and still want to push apps. That should be something that you should be able to do. Interesting stuff. Okay, cool.
Nice. Well, that runs us through our topics. Is there anything else anybody else wanted to talk about? Going once, going twice. All right. Well, thank you all so much. I'll catch you at the next one.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.